Yeah. So okay, I'd be curious to sort of go through uh, this last piece that you put on to your website, the Sleeping in Sunday. That's yours, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So the how to convince an atheist that God exists, which I love. It's very nice, well written. Um, so you have three demands before you'll be willing to change your position.
Well,
And I
to be clear, these aren't demands per se. Like I put a caveat in there that I don't know. Like none of this could be convincing per se. Like I said, you can be skeptical about anything to the point where you don't believe anything. But it would be more than a God would have given right now, and would at least give people a reason, give me
okay.
personally a reason to stop and think about it for 2 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, do you want to just go through? I don't know if you can pull it up on your screen or something, but I'd love to go through it with you.
Yeah, by all means.
Okay, cool. So the first one is a clear, authenticated, specific prophecy. I'm talking about a document from thousands of years ago, confirmed by experts, historians, that lists a date, time, and location that a particular event will occur. None of this four horses or seven seals nonsense. This should be well within God's power, and it would eliminate the objection that a prophecy is too vague. Why would God want to do that?
Why wouldn't he?
Do you care if your cells believe in you?
Not particularly.
Why would God care if the animals believe in him? Again, I'm saying him, and I apologize. I do mean it today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, God is perfectly welcome to not show himself and remain hidden. But there are a lot of God concepts that are very insistent that I believe in him and treat him with a certain level of respect and deference. And if I don't do that, they are insistent that I go to this unpleasant realm that they have created for reprobates
Hell.
like
Yeah, yeah,
me.
yeah.
And and, and obviously I I rightly or wrongly I read a lot of stuff targeted towards Christians because they affect my life way more than Muslims or Jews or pantheists or what have you. So especially in the case of a supposedly all loving uh, Christian God, then he would theoretically be appalled at the very notion that one of his beloved creations would wind up in hell and would do everything he can to prevent that. And believers say that he has already. I respectfully disagree with them on that. But one of the things that believers do say should be pointing me to God is prophecy.
Mhm.
And uh, a lot of the prophecies that are presented to me as evidence of God are bogus, are not as well attested as I think they are, or are more specifically to this particular entry, very vague and prone to people thinking they've been fulfilled when they apply to uh, when they don't necessarily apply to the situation. Um, so I
Yeah,
mean, they,
I guess my struggle is just like, why would you, if you were God, why would you make a prophecy? Why do you care what a bunch of humans on this tiny little rock called Earth do or think?
well, that would be a particular formulation of God, and and to be clear, I'm not talking about this. Could be a Calvinist God, for example, who has already decided that I'm not going to heaven because I'm not one of his elect.
Yeah, I don't believe
And
in heaven or hell, to clarify. But yeah,
okay, yeah, but yeah, there are certainly conceptions of God that don't really care if I believe in them, and this wouldn't apply to them specifically.
okay. But if specifically if you were God, you wouldn't care if a bunch of tiny little amoeba on Earth, right,
Yeah,
believed in you.
if if I were, like I said, if I were a Calvinist God or some other superior, like or as a
No, I'm just saying you.
deistic
If you
God,
were
if I
if you were
was a
you.
God,
Yeah.
okay, if I had, well, if I was a God, I would have done a lot of things differently that would have
Absolutely.
obviated this question to begin with. Like I would not have created hell. I would have just forgiven everyone if they were. I would not
My
have.
point isn't about the hell. My point is about the prophecy. Why would you want people to believe in you if you were God?
Well, this is what I mean. So if um, Yeah, okay. Well, I'll have to roll back everything I just said. Um, if I were not a god that cared, if anyone believed in me, then no, I probably wouldn't bother with prophecy. But this blog post is specifically tailored towards a god who supposedly wants to get people's attention and wants them to believe in him very badly. So
But if
um,
you were God, you wouldn't want that.
I don't know what I would want if I were God. I may very well be a Sims type creator god who just makes little people that go around and have babies and speak gibberish to each other, and they die, and they never know that they're in a game that I am playing.
Yeah.
Real life examples, but uh, I
Yeah.
could also be a very creative, like I'm a creative sort. I like to write little stories and make characters and whatnot, and I may make a world where everyone's little characters in this grand narrative that I'm creating, and I want them to know that there is an author behind them who has a great plan for them, and everything's going to turn out fine at the end. And if I was a guy like that, then I would try and find a way to get to know them or to make them aware that I exist.
What does get to know them mean?
Uh, I probably shouldn't have phrased it that way.
No, but I think it's a curious because that's something certainly that God, in the Christian perspective, does try, quote unquote, to do. What exactly does it that you mean by that?
Well, let's think about the traditional Christian chestnut. It's not a religion; it's a relationship, which implies that there is some give and take involved. Um, a relationship is two people who are learning about each other and spending time together and communicating back and forth, and there's some sort of mutual interchange going on there. And now, a lot of God concepts, I don't know why God would want that, because God is also supposed to be not lacking in anything in theory. So, it could be a God who is not all powerful, powerful enough to create a universe and all the living beings in it, but not powerful enough to not get lonely on occasion.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I might desire to, maybe I create the world just to have people to talk to. That would
Sure,
be uh, a
sure.
a
Do you
possibility.
think that humans are yet at the point where you'd want to talk to them? Because I don't.
This came up. I was talking to someone the other day about this, like about whether aliens would come and visit us if they knew, if they were flying around and taking a look at us, if that was true. And the point was brought up, snarky people be like, well, there's no intelligent life on this planet, and they're gonna go on their way. But I might create people just to laugh at their misfortune, like a
Well,
jerk
I don't think it's
Schadenfreude
that.
god. So what was that?
Yeah, I don't think it. I don't think it's make fun of or sort of whatever it was you described. I would perhaps make it so that I could study cell like we study cells. And
Mm-hmm.
similarly, if I were God, I would probably want to study humans, but I wouldn't care about them. If a cell dies in a petri dish, I'm not concerned about that, right? If I'm torturing a cell, quote unquote, by pulling it out from its the animal that it's from, or whatever it is, like I don't care, right?
Oh yeah, you could be like, hey, let's see what happens
If I poke it, yeah,
if I swap all humans' hands and feet, so they have feet for hands and hands for feet.
yeah,
That would be
absolutely,
hilarious. Yeah, I might laugh at the
yeah.
pain that would cause them in the.
Well, it's not, but it's not even that. Like it's just like, I mean, I suppose you could hypothetically imagine God trying, like again, when I'm saying God, I do mean just the collective animals in the world, but
Mhm.
operating collectively. I suppose you could frame it as it's trying to, screw us over in some way. but even beyond that, like I don't think that it has any interest in getting to know us. We're just, I mean, the universe has been around at least that we know of for 13 billion years. We're around for like what, 90 on average? Not even that. It's like
Mm-hmm.
85 worldwide. So like that is orders of magnitude. Like we're a blink of the eye, right? Humanity as a whole has only been around for 200,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's a joke, right? That's like a minute and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So why on earth would, or not on earth, why in the universe rather, would God care?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I agree with you. But once again, if we're going back to the blog post, that
Yeah,
this wasn't written about that kind of God. This is written about a God that who supposedly has been trying very, very hard to get my attention, and apparently I'm just missing it or am stubborn or something. This would be saying, hey, if this God really wanted to get my attention, let me give you some suggestions as to how to do it. If God doesn't care, he doesn't care, and isn't going to even be bothered.
yeah, I guess I understand that. I guess the frustration though is you're framing this simultaneously as both being God writ large, right? All of theism, while also attacking a kind of straw man, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
attacking Christianity, which is a kind of straw man version of actual God principles, right?
Well, I think I'm pretty. Mm, I'm looking at the post now. I may not have been completely explicit that I was talking about a more Christian or classical theistic type God. I mean, I open it specifically. I kind of frame it around Kanye West and his
Sure, and he's a straw
dubious
man.
Christian.
Yeah, yeah, he's a walking straw man.
Right, but he's a walking straw man of a Christian God who is supposedly trying to turn atheists into believers in the Christian God specifically. So yeah, if we were talking about what would it take to get me to believe in the God that you're proposing, that would be a completely different blog post.
Okay, so what would it require?
Well, that would kind of sum up the entire conversation here in a thesis statement. Um, I'm behind the idea of collective actors, from cells in the body to bodies in a civilization to civilizations in a planet and so forth. Um, I just don't really agree with the God label. We have
What would you
it's
label it?
I would call it the universe, and we could say that hey, we are learning more about how the universe works. Like when we discovered like getting back to the insects, and
Mhm.
when scientists started discovering more about swarm intelligence and hive mind and whatnot, uh, within an ant colony or a beehive or something, they didn't invent a new name for an ant colony or a beehive to in light of that. They just say, hey, we know more now about how ants communicate and how a colony accomplishes all these great things.
I think they
Uh,
do. I think colony is a different word than group of fleas. Fleas don't work together in the same manner that ants or bees do. We say colony when we mean a grouping of bees in a manner that we don't around flies.
well, we have names for a lot of group of things. I mean,
Right, that's my point.
we have a murder of crows or a
Sure,
pod
but
of whales.
my point simply is that like there is a word for group of insects. I'm not sure if there even is a word for groups of flies because they don't really like we don't really care about groups of flies, but
Mhm.
we do care about groups of ants because groups of ants, colonies, work together to a degree that it makes sense to talk about that grouping, right? So when we're talking about a universe that is not chock full of life, that is not operating collectively, that strikes me as a different thing than a colony universe, a universe that is operating collectively. A God universe is what I'd call it.
Well, I guess what would be interested to see is I don't know if if ant colonies started to be called colonies before or after their swarm intelligence was studied in detail. I would guess that we can, ants and bees are very highly social and operate in groups, and we can observe that and come up with a name for that group. And based on their highly social nature, even if we don't know how that works yet. Um, and so I don't know if, like I said,
Right.
I don't know that for sure, but I don't know
Yeah.
if it was the swarm intelligence that led to them being called a colony, or if they were
Right.
already
So
called a
I would,
colony.
yeah, I would assume that it was. I mean, again, I also don't know for sure the history, but I would presume that the reason that the vast majority of people on Earth think that the ant queen is the brain behind it is probably because that was believed by the majority, even of scientists, prior to the understanding of swarm intelligence. Right.
Uh, that wouldn't surprise me. I don't. Once again, that's
Okay.
outside my
So
level of
let's
expertise.
absolutely. So let's just go with that presumption
Mhm.
for now. If that's the case, that's a different kind of intelligence, right? But it's still intelligence. We understood, even if it was controlled, and that these were all sort of drones of the queen. We understood that there was a collective intelligence, even if it was centralized. The intelligence, it was a collective intelligence in a manner that was very distinct from the lack of collective intelligence of a bunch of fleas that don't work together, right?
Well, I'd be interested to see the history on that because it would seem to. I imagine that people would have been able to like pre-scientific age, people would have been able to observe the actions of ants and bees working together, see how they all operate towards seemingly the same ends and not know how that works. I don't know if they would have necessarily applied the term intelligence to that. Um, but once again,
It wouldn't
I
have
don't know.
defined the word intelligent. Really, you don't think? Even if you didn't understand how they worked, if you saw an ant colony, if you just walked up as a total random person with no understanding whatsoever of the system, you just saw this is a colony, right?
Hmm.
Here's this mound of dirt that is quite clearly full of holes, that is quite clearly full, teeming with this same kind of species. That I think I can reasonably claim that I would look at that and describe that as being some form of intelligence, some form of design, if you will, that I wouldn't if I just went up to see, wherever fleas live. I don't know where they live.
Well, how would well? I mean, there's a lot that is different about ants and fleas besides the collective intelligence. So you could look at that and say, well, ants operate differently in fleas. They're much more organized than fleas. We can observe that. We just don't know why yet. And I don't know, before this was studied in detail, how you would tell if it was either A, collective intelligence, or B, um, smaller intelligences. Well, that's kind of the same thing, isn't it?
Right, that's the point. I don't really care why the ant colony is smart. Clearly, the ant colony is smart in a way that the flea living in the dung heap is not.
Well, there's no collective intelligence with the flea.
Right,
If we're
but
saying, yeah.
but again, I don't like when I see the colony. What I see is their actions. I've seen like what I'm literally looking at is here is extraordinary architecture, right? They make some exquisite architecture. They really do.
Hmm.
Um, and I look at that, or I look at a honey, a beehive, and I'm like, wow, that is awesome, right? It looks freaking cool, right? They're able to do some really fantastic stuff. They're able to protect this giant system. That's awesome. They're clearly smart. I don't care what kind of smart that is, right? Different kinds of intelligence obviously operate in different ways, but ultimately, I don't even understand how our intelligence works. I don't think that it's fair to claim that science in general understands how our intelligence works. So I am not in the position to try to claim that I understand how other forms of intelligence systems work when even we don't understand ours.
So I'm trying to remember how we got down this train
Yeah.
again
So my point.
to
Yeah,
begin with, but
absolutely.
yeah.
Sure. So my point is that like when I describe intelligence, I have to describe it as a spectrum. I can't describe it as being like, here's how humans work as our intelligence, and here's how colonies work and as their intelligence, etc. Because if you include it as a spectrum, there's no reason to end that spectrum at our level. There's no reason to end that at the city level. There's no reason at level of the country or company or whatever it might be, or the humanity in general, or Earth. You'd have to get it all the way zoomed out all the way to the universe. There's no reason to describe it any other way in my mind.
Yeah, and I've kind of already addressed my uh,
No.
my hesitation on that. Like I said, I get where I get where you're operating from. I don't think that there's zero merit to it
What
in
would
not.
convince you?
Well, I mean that's the thing. I mean, like I said, I'm on board with collective intelligence. I don't really have an issue with that. I just don't really see a reason to call it anything more than that.
Okay, so you're comfortable with an approximately omnipresent, approximately omnipotent, and approximately omniscient um, uh, totality, if you will, of all of the life in the universe that is collectively capable of doing virtually anything it wants to you.
Well, we kind of started down this track, and then we kind of talked about the Christian God for a little bit, but um, I mean, okay, we talked
Is there
about
is
we talked about omnipotence already.
Yeah.
Omniscient, uh, I think, would be even more problematic because even as a collective, even if the life in the universe doesn't know everything about the universe, uh, if
Right. That's my point. I don't think the universe is omniscient with respect to itself, but it certainly is omniscient with respect to you. In the same way that you're not omniscient, but you're omniscient in the perspective from the perspective of the cell within your body.
well, this is something I don't think necessarily comes down to perspective because whether or not a cell thinks I know everything, I definitely don't know everything.
Yeah.
So even
But
if, sorry, go
go
ahead.
for it. No, go, no, please do. I'm
I
sorry.
was going to say, so even if the cell, I mean, objectively speaking, something either knows everything or does not know everything. That's true irrespective of the perspective of the person who's or the entity that's perceiving it. So even if like when you're a kid, you think you're oh golly, my dad just knows everything, and then you get older and you realize my dad doesn't know half the stuff. He's been pretending all this time. He's like Calvin's dad from Calvin and Hobbes. If I'm dating myself with a '90s reference, but kids think that their parents grow up know everything, and they get older and they realize their parents have just and they start having kids of their own, and they realize their parents have been kind of half-assing it this whole time, and so whether or not their dad or parent is objectively not omniscient, even if their kid thinks they are. Um, that's why I would be especially hesitant to apply that to the universe or God as universe, because whether or not the universe is uh, omniscient from our perspective, then I don't know if it necessarily can be applied. I mean, you can say that the sum total of all things. Let me see, how can I phrase this and not sound like a pedantic jerk? The sum total of everything that can be known or is currently known is way greater than what I personally know.
Sure, orders of magnitude, many orders of
Yeah.
magnitude more. Yeah. So many orders of magnitude more um, that it is likely that you couldn't even ask a question that the universe couldn't answer?
I'll give that a tentative yes.
So it's omniscient. It's practically omniscient, right?
Practically. Oh, okay. I'll say that.
From a perspective of practicality, it is omniscient.
Sure, but that's different.
So we can get into the philosophy of is it actually omniscient? But there's no distinction in the way that you should operate your life between the universe as it exists and a truly omniscient God.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So we're now at omnipresent, yes. Omniscient, yes. And then omnipotent,
Well,
having unlimited power.
I just want to be clear. There's if we're still talking, I mean, we're talking definitions here, and if whether or not the universe is practically omniscient or way more. I mean, just because something is practically different or practically the same doesn't mean it's not actually different. Like this is why like deism, for example. Like there's no, like I think deism is a kind of a weird position to hold because practically there is no difference between a God that set a universe in motion and then let it ride and no God at all. So if there's a deistic God, my life changes by 0%, but deism and atheism are still different things.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to be clear. I'm granting you that practically the universe may as well be omniscient, but that doesn't. I still don't think that it is omniscient. But once again, that this is a. I don't want to keep arguing words where it's
this is interesting because okay, the same certainly. So coming back to the Minecraft example, obviously I am not the coder who made Minecraft, so I am very clearly not omniscient with respect to Minecraft. I quite clearly, to some degree, I'm not even omnipotent with respect to Minecraft. However, if I'm the coder of Minecraft, there's actually nothing that I can't do to Minecraft, right? There's nothing about Minecraft that I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that doesn't mean that I'm actually omniscient. And similarly, if like from the perspective of you as a portion of Minecraft, you wouldn't be able to change it. From the perspective of you as an individual human, there's no distinction between the universe, which I'm not quite comfortable with calling the universe the coder, because again, I think that the universe is also the code, right? Mm-hmm. But from the perspective of the universe, so yeah, there's no, like, obviously the coder isn't actually omniscient, but it's materially indistinguishable from being omniscient, and the same is true of the universe. So if you're willing to frame the coder as being God, surely you have to also be willing to frame the universe as being God.
Well, once you kind of indicate yourself also that there's a difference between the coder and the code.
Mm-hmm.
So to my view, the universe would be the code, or rather I don't know if I want to argue details within an analogy, but the universe would be like the Minecraft world. The code would be like the laws of physics that the world operates by, and the coder would be a more traditional theistic separate entity God.
Sure. So Minecraft, I would define as a dead universe, because Minecraft is not evolving, right?
And in my Minecraft worlds, everything dies anyway. So yeah, I can get
right. But there's like the actual the total amount of life in Minecraft, like in the actual game itself, if everyone logged off, is 0. So I wouldn't count it as being alive. So I don't think that the totality of the code is alive in that context. So I agree that that sort of does sort of break down. But my point, the point stands that like omniscience is has to be in the context of its relationship to you, right? It's not that it's literally omniscient. It's just omniscient with respect to you.
Well, can we? Well, this is what I was trying to get to get across because words mean things, and
Yeah.
I'd be totally. I'm trying to think if I can phrase it a different way so we're not just talking in circles.
Sure.
Um, okay, let me see if I understand it this way. There's a sum total of things that it is possible to know, and the universe, since it contains all those things, would theoretically know them. Is that
Um, Not quite, because there's certainly things that happen inside of your body that you don't understand, right? But in comparison to any cell inside of your body, you have a much better understanding of your body than any of those cells.
but if I were as omniscient as my cells think I am, I would know those things, but I don't.
As your cells think that you are. Um, yeah, I mean, again, I don't think that the universe understands itself, right? I don't think that anything is omniscient with respect to itself. But I do think that that you are omniscient with respect to your cells
I feel like
from
we
their
should kind of
perspective.
I feel like we should kind of put a pin on this because I keep wanting to go back to the same things, and
Yeah,
I think there's some aspect of this where we're talking past each other, and I'm not sure in this moment what
yeah,
that
it's totally fine.
is.
That's totally fine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll probably watch this and come up with something. Oh, that's what he was getting at,
yeah,
and then we'll have to
I'd be
throw
happy
it
to
out
come back
there.
on if you'll have me next week. Um, yeah. Okay. So to the point of omnipotent having unlimited power, that one strikes me as the second most obvious after omnipresent, right? That one
Well,
seems pretty clear that all of the animals in the universe, if they decided to do something to you, could do it.
the you know let me think about this. Being even the sum total of all the animals of the universe is still very small compared with the universe itself, because the universe is very large, and as much as we can see of it or detect of it, we haven't detected life anywhere within the trillions of light years we've been able to detect so far. And as far as we can tell, there are very few planets that are even capable of harboring life. So as far as we can tell, most of the universe is dead.
Sure.
So I don't know, even if a infinitesimally small fraction of the universe has life in it, I don't know what exactly you're proposing that life, the sum total of all life, could possibly do to affect the universe.
To affect the universe, a whole lot of things.
For instance,
Well, for instance, we've certainly changed the climate in Earth, rather,
right?
right?
We've been by Earth for sure.
Right.
Um,
So we're I would describe us as a pretty low level intelligence in comparison to the whole universe. I would presume that there are other intelligences that are a heck of a lot smarter than us, that have done a heck of a lot more than us, that have started to affect much larger swaths of the universe than just an individual planet. However, clearly, from the very small little corner of the universe that we're operating from, it's very obvious that we have an effect on at the very least our planet, right?
our planet, yeah, but
Sure.
yeah,
So if we have the ability to operate and affect our planet when literally we've only managed to get to our moon, we haven't even gotten to Mars yet, as actual people, right? Like it strikes me as quite obvious that it is possible and therefore likely, just given the size of the universe, that other life forms have been able to get off of their planet and have started to travel the stars, if you will, and terraforming and affecting them. Sorry.
right. Now we're kind of in a weird situation where we're talking about what may be possible someday, and it would seem like I don't think we would have disagreement with the idea that theoretically, so any planet that may be having life, assuming they haven't vaporized themselves or something, will continue to increase in technology and be able to expand their area of influence further and further and affect more than just their own planet, other planets, perhaps galaxies at some point. I like sci-fi. I hope we get to that point. But
Absolutely, yeah.
um, but so I'm fine with saying if we're talking about potency, then the life in the universe is increasing in potency. But omnipotency, uh, that would be a little bit different. That would imply there's no corner of the universe that will wind up being untouched by life at some point, if
Yeah,
I'm
so
understanding.
okay. For context, humans have been alive for a minute and a half. We've been alive for 200,000 years,
Right.
right? That is nothing, right? 1903, we invent the plane, right?
Mm-hmm.
Literally, 1969, just 66 years later, right? Two-thirds of a century, right? We already are managing to get to the moon, right?
Right.
Um, how long do you think it's going to be before we get to Mars?
Theoretically, we should be there by now.
Or I should clarify. Before humans are landing on Mars, how long would you guesstimate?
Within this century, for sure.
I think that's probably right. How long before we get the entire solar system?
Probably a couple more centuries.
Okay, I'm a little more optimistic than you, but okay, let's call it let's call it 3 centuries before we get the entirety of it, right? 200,000 years to 200 400 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
200,400 years, right? So like that is a blink of an eye that we have managed to go from a non flying species to a species that is able to take over an entire solar system. And then from there, obviously you have to get around this whole light travel, speed of light thing. And I'm not sure you can. So if you can't get around the speed of light thing, then it'll take us another 100,000 years to start taking over much of our galaxy,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not that long. Let's say it takes us 15 million years to take over the entire galaxy. That is a blink of an eye still from the perspective of a literally 13 billion year old universe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it strikes me if we were able to do all this in 200,000 years, that almost certainly there are other species that have gotten there before us and gotten there a lot before us, gotten there a billion years before us. And if they got there a billion years before us, then they've probably already taken over the vast majority of the universe. We just haven't seen it. We don't understand it.
Okay. I think maybe I can might be able to bring this to a level where we might have a little bit more agreement if I think
Okay.
about it this way. So I am. So we're talking specifically about a tradition, a triomni, omniscient, omnipotent,
Yep.
omnipresent God. I'd be okay with a God that is not omni per se, but is unbelievably potent, unbelievably, to our perspective,
Yeah.
unbelievably knowledgeable, unbelievably powerful, unbelievably over present in many places. Would that be a definition of God that would fit with what you're proposing?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think that brings everything to a level where I think I was thinking Omni. It's like okay, it can not be all of these things, but it can be way more of these things than I can
Right.
perceive.
Many orders of magnitude more.
Yeah,
Sure.
and that
Yep.
would that would work with the cells and me to my cells, and
Hmm. Hmm.
I'd be okay with that as an analogy. Uh,
Okay.
so
So
yeah,
why are you uncomfortable with calling it God then?
because it's I feel like I mentioned this, but um, it seems like an unnecessary label to add to things that we have a label for already. Um, and if like the word God has, this is not just you. This has come up with a couple of like people they interact with where things get redefined, and I kind of complete for the purposes of this conversation, I completely glossed over the definition of sentience that you're proposing. But
Oh,
that
sure.
kind of
I'd love to
that kind of
explore
runs
that.
into the
Yeah.
same problem where uh, sentience, it has a definition, and you disagree with that definition, which you can, but if you intend to go out and have conversations, we need to be able to agree on what words mean. So if your proposal relies on redefining sentience in a completely different way, maybe we shouldn't call that sentience because it's only going to get in the way of discourse
Mm.
and understanding. And that's why I tried not to use that word as talk in terms
Hmm.
of tasks and performance and
Hmm.
so forth, because
Sure.
uh,
How do you
the, the,
define sentence?
to my understanding, sentience is more like the ability to think, feel, react
What does that mean?
to.
Yeah, yeah. Give me evidence that you think, or that I think.
Well, if we're well, we're talking about. To be clear, I'm trying to explain my issue with the word God, so
Right.
I don't want
Right.
to get a whole other rabbit trail.
So,
But that's the kind of issue I have with God is that like you can if you for yourself personally, if you want to uh, define God in the terms that you're providing, in terms of the universe as a whole and the things operating within it, um, that's that's your call. I can't tell you not to use the word that way, but we're going to run into issues when we're having this discussion in the public sphere. Um, like we couldn't operate at all if we're using different definitions for words all the time. And
right. That's why I want to use the framework of um, materially indistinguishable from being omnipotent, omnipresent, and um, uh, sentient. Right.
so you're okay. So you're saying that
I'm just trying to use the framework of God that
okay.
the vast majority
Let
of.
me see if I've got this as after an hour and a half. So so my issue, my confusion is that you're not using a definition of God that most people would understand. But the definition of God that most people would understand, or at least a whole lot of people understand, is the omnipresent, omniscient, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah.
Um, and you're using that definition, but you're saying that the universe as a whole is those things also,
Hmm.
and therefore and therefore we can call it God.
Yeah, and I would describe those things as being an arbitrary cutoff on the spectrum that I'm talking of as being uh, intelligence, right? So that there's the point where you get to life, there's a point where you get to sentient, um, there's a point where we get to uh, God.
Okay, so I think I've got that finally after 90 universe damn minutes.
Sure.
I felt like getting some stuff down here. So I think my sole objection then in that case would be kind of like we were talking before, kind of like what I was trying to get across before with um, beehives and ant colonies, where we don't need to like as we okay maybe we don't use that as a example. Like we can talk about uh, like the planet Pluto, for instance. For a while there, we did not know a lot about the planet Pluto, other than that it was there. And then in the last couple of years, we had a satellite go by, took a lot of data, and now we know a lot more about Pluto than we used to. but we still call it Pluto. We don't start calling it Jupiter because Jupiter has an entirely different baggage associated with it. We don't call Pluto
Yeah,
God because God has a lot of baggage associated with it.
but we do
Um,
stop calling it because of what we now understand about Pluto. We no longer call it a planet; we call it a dwarf planet, right? Because we understand more about it.
well, that's a controversial redefinition
Do you
of,
disagree
of,
with
of
it?
scientific terminology.
I don't think
I, I,
scientifically it's not controversial scientifically. I know
right.
a lot
No,
of people
I hear you.
get upset about it. But
I know. I'm half joking there. I don't
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
care. I
But
just,
the point is that like we understand more about Pluto now, so we've changed what we call it because we understand it better. Similarly, if we all of a sudden understood that actually there's a really complicated interworking relationship between the fleas that are hanging out in the dung heap, all of a
mhm,
sudden we probably call them a colony because we understand them better, right?
mhm,
So I think there's a distinction. There's a clear like reason that we call certain things that exist out there in this solar system, you know,
mhm.
dwarf planets, and other things we call them actual planets, and other things we just call comets or whatever it is, right? Like that distinction is an important distinction, and it's also important to describe the difference between here's a bunch of insects who live together but are really not acting as a colony, and here are a bunch of insects that are working together and work together like a lot and are clearly a colony, clearly have collective intelligence. This I'm going to call this bee system or this ant system colony.
I'll tell you what. Let's try approaching things this way. Maybe this will help. Um, are there any other attributes to this God aside from the triomni attributes? Like, is this a God that communicates? Is this a God that we can, uh, I don't know, pray to? Is this a God that directly influence? Like, are there any other attributes of this God that also would apply to a more traditional view of God?
So I think that this god has goals, if that's what you're asking, right? So I would describe. Oh shoot, the internet's going bad again. Um, can you still hear me?
Yes. Hmm.
Okay, okay, that's good. I guess it's self-healed. Um, I I would describe the God, this universe, as trying to expand, as trying, and this is perhaps a little bit more controversial, to make things more what I would describe as being complex, make things more intelligent, right? It is doing things, I would say, that allow more intelligence to happen.
Okay, but hmm, I'll tell you what. Here's what we'll do because I
Okay.
feel like we've covered a ton of ground already, and I
Oh,
feel like
absolutely.
there's
Yeah.
probably more. I know we've got more videos to put out, and we could probably go into a lot of stuff about that specifically.
Sure.
Um, but how about we call this one where it is?
Okay. Absolutely.
I definitely
Yeah.
enjoyed talking to you. I'd be open to getting you on again to talk about more
Great.
stuff.
Great.
But yeah. So, for our viewers, where can people find out more about you? What's your channel? We'll probably put some stuff in the description too.
Yeah,
But
sure. So my channel is Alien Milsrow on YouTube. On Twitter, I'm also at Milsrow. Those are the only two that I really use so far. I may eventually use my Twitch, which is also at Milsrow, but don't follow that yet because it's useless. There's nothing on it.
okay.
Those are the two. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thank you
Excellent.
so much. I
Thank you for
appreciate it.
joining us, for sure.